Hey rockers, this video is going to be about hammer-ons and pull-offs and how you can use trills to really help strengthen your chops. So the first, most important thing that we're going to be talking about today is just simply your techniques when you're performing hammer-ons and pull-offs. The first one we're going to be talking about today is doing hammer-ons because those are objectively easier. Now, this may be easier or harder depending on the style of guitar that you have. So you'll notice on my guitar, I have a custom bridge that I've put onto my guitar. This is a performance bridge, so my strings are much lower to my bridge than most guitars. If you have an acoustic, your strings are going to be a little bit higher, so it's going to be a little bit more work to push that fret down on your guitar. Once again, whether this is easy or hard, the technique stays the same. Now, in my experience, this really only affects if you're trying to do a hammer-on with an open note, like so. If your guitar or your strings are a little bit higher, then you can offset this a little bit by just holding one string down and then doing hammer-ons from there. So that way you don't have to do as much work to get that note from a high spot down to the fret. As I've said before, regardless of what kind of guitar you have, the technique remains the same. Now, the reason why they are called hammer-ons is because you are trying to hammer that note to get it to ring out. Like so. When you are performing hammer-ons, you want your finger to be as close to the fret as possible, because your fret is where that note comes from. So it doesn't really help to have your guitar or your fingers be very far from the fret. You can do it, but you're going to get a much cleaner tone being as close to the fret as possible. On top of that, you'll have a much easier time getting that note to ring out if you were closer to the fret, because you won't need to be hammering as hard to get that note to ring out. While doing hammer-ons does take physical strength, you should not be having to hammer with all of your might to get that note to ring out. Because the harder you hit, you are going to start noticing other notes beginning to ring out with that percussive fashion. With that being said, there are ways to manage or mitigate the amount of string noise that you are getting from other strings when you're doing hammer-ons and pull-offs. The best way to do this is to just mute the other strings. There are two ways of doing this. The first one is to use your picking hand and just to put a finger on the string above and or below the strings that you are going to be tapping. This allows me to make sure that only the string that I am playing is the only note that rings out. So the other way that you can mute these strings is by using the fingers on your fretting hand. So this is where things sort of change from the traditional style of teaching that most other teachers use. While a lot of traditional style guitar teachers tell you want to have the tip of your finger come down onto this note, when you are trying to mute the other strings, or again, manage and mitigate string noise, you can use the pads of your finger to press down your note while making sure that the tip of your finger is muting that other note. And you will also notice that the bottom string is also being covered by that finger as well. So this allows you to make sure that both of those strings are being muted while the note that I'm trying to play is the only one that rings out. Now, once you start getting comfortable with muting these other strings, we can move into pull-offs. Now, a pull-off is not simply just pulling off of the guitar or taking your finger off of it. You want to be able to audibly hear a note without having that note already ringing. So, this looks like how it sounds. You are going to pull on the string with your finger and then flick that string off to get that noise. Once again, down, now flick it to let it go. So once you get comfortable with both of those techniques, hammer-ons and pulling off, we can start getting comfortable with making these techniques a little bit stronger. Once you get comfortable with them, you'll start to notice that it is physically exhausting. It's going to hurt your fingers and it's definitely going to hurt your wrist. So, great way to get comfortable with them is by just doing them with your spider walks. So once again, for a quick recap, your spider walk is simply just moving up your guitar finger by finger, moving up one fret and one string each time. Now, to incorporate your hammer-ons and pull-offs, you simply just start with the first string, then go to the next string, and keep going. Once you start getting comfortable with those, you can start doing different fingers, and you'll notice that the farther apart your fingers are, the harder they're going to be. And then again, just going through each finger. So next up we can go with our second and third finger. And then moving on to our second and fourth. Then moving down to our third and fourth fingers. This really allows you to see where your weaknesses are with each of your fingers and which ones that you can use to get stronger. Now that being said, while this is a good metric for figuring out what training and continuing to push those, don't hurt yourself. There's a difference between training and just pain. Definitely, once again, it is great to be able to figure out where you need to work on and where you can strengthen yourself, but you don't need to be doing these for hours at a time. Just a little bit of practice every day, taking that time to build it, and once again, just see where your strengths and weaknesses are. Being able to play a lot of licks, it's really helpful to be able to use each and every one of your fingers. So, with that being said, that concludes our lesson today. Keep on doing those hammer-ons and pull-offs, keep on getting moving, and keep on rocking.